Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. In ancient palaces where the absolute power of the pharaoh shaped destinies, there existed a dark practice that persisted for generations: castration. Men of great potential were captured or chosen for an act of brutality that marked them physically and emotionally. With a single blow, the blade eliminated the possibility of offspring, depriving them of a dynastic future and a crucial part of their masculine identity. Within this disturbing context emerges the figure of Potiphar, a powerful Egyptian official, captain of the pharaoh's guard. Some biblical translations present him as a eunuch, but without details about his physical condition or any explicit mention of castration. This raises the question: does the Bible really suggest that Potiphar was castrated? Or, is there any indication in the scriptures that he underwent a sex change? The answer, based on the sacred text, is clear. If you are interested in this type of content, leave your like and stay until the end to discover the profound lesson this story reveals. Did Potiphar change sex during his encounter with Joseph? Potiphar, mentioned in the biblical narrative of Genesis, was a man of great power and prestige in ancient Egypt. As a pharaoh's official and captain of the guard, he held a prominent position, reflecting not only his military importance but also his political influence. The Bible describes him as a pharaoh's official, captain of the guard, a position that denoted great responsibility, being in charge of the pharaoh's personal security in the custody of state prisoners. This strategic role made Potiphar one of the most trusted and powerful men in Egypt, with direct access to the pharaoh and involvement in the kingdom's most delicate matters. His wealth and influence were also reflected in his residence, which was more than a home, it was a symbol of his status. Potiphar lived in a luxurious house, adorned with the finest Egyptian artifacts of the time, described in the Bible as prosperous under Joseph's administration, serving as a center of power where important decisions were made and dignitaries were received. In Genesis 39 verse 1, the Bible introduces Potiphar as follows: Joseph was taken to Egypt, and Potiphar, a pharaoh's eunuch and captain of the guard, an Egyptian man, bought him from the hands of the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. It is at this point that the controversy about Potiphar arises. The term eunuch, used in some translations, traditionally refers to men who were castrated, often before puberty. In antiquity, especially in Eastern cultures and occasionally in Egypt, eunuchs were often chosen to occupy trusted positions at court, as their condition made them more loyal, without family interests that could threaten royal power. The practice of castration was common in various ancient cultures, including Mesopotamia, Persia, and, in certain periods, Egypt. Eunuchs were often employed in important roles, such as harem guardians, advisors, and administrators, due to the trust that monarchs placed in them. Castration was seen as a way to ensure that these servants would not have descendants, which reduced the risk of dynastic ambitions. However, this practice also carried a social and personal stigma, as the condition of a eunuch was associated with the loss of virility in personal power. In various biblical narratives, such as in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, we see references to this practice as a strategy of power and control. A notable example is Artaxerxes, who ruled the Persian Empire with firmness, using castration to ensure the loyalty of those close to the throne. This practice not only guaranteed the fidelity of the king's wives but also turned eunuchs into submissive servants, used in royal celebrations and festivities. During the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, known for his ruthless conquests and desire to consolidate absolute power, the mutilation of captured prisoners became a common and terrifying tactic. This brutal practice served not only as physical punishment but also as a means of dehumanizing and subjugating conquered peoples, stripping them of their masculinity and capacity to resist Babylonian rule. By mutilating his enemies, Nebuchadnezzar was not just securing military victory, he was crushing the spirit of entire nations, leaving scars not only on the bodies but also on the minds of survivors. The physical pain inflicted on prisoners became an extension of humiliation and emotional trauma, creating a psychological weapon that echoed far beyond the battlefields. The fear of mutilation became a powerful instrument of control, intimidating future adversaries and ensuring submission even before conflicts began. This relentless strategy reinforced Nebuchadnezzar's authority, making him a symbol of terror and domination throughout the region. However, the focus of our video today is the intriguing case of Potiphar and Joseph. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, also known as Israel, was the firstborn of his beloved wife, Rachel. From a young age, Joseph stood out among his brothers, not only because he was his father's favorite but also because of his prophetic dreams that hinted at a future where he would wield authority over his family. Jacob openly displayed his preference for Joseph, gifting him a coat of many colors, a symbol of special love and a position of prominence within the family. This coat, a mantle of distinction, fueled the jealousy and resentment of his brothers, who felt overlooked. The situation worsened when Joseph began sharing his dreams. In one of them, he saw his brother's sheaves of wheat bowing down to his sheaf, in another, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down before him. These dreams were interpreted as a sign that Joseph, the youngest among them, would one day rule over his brothers, further inflaming their hatred. Unable to bear the thought of submitting to Joseph, the brothers conspired against him. One day, while tending their flocks far from their father's house, they saw Joseph approaching. Seizing the opportunity, they decided to get rid of him. Initially, they planned to kill him, but Reuben, the eldest brother, intervened, suggesting that they throw him into an empty cistern, intending to rescue him later. However, while Reuben was away, the other brothers saw a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants on their way to Egypt. Judah, one of the brothers, proposed that they sell Joseph as a slave instead of killing him. Thus, for 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was sold to the merchants, who took him to Egypt, a rich and powerful land at the time. This journey, likely marked by fear and uncertainty for Joseph, took him away from his homeland and family, casting him into an unknown future. To cover up their crime, Joseph's brothers killed a goat and dipped his coat in the animal's blood. When they returned home, they showed the bloodied coat to Jacob, who immediately concluded that his son had been devoured by a wild beast. Jacob, in deep mourning, tore his clothes and could not be comforted, believing his beloved son was dead. While Jacob mourned Joseph's loss, the young Hebrew was taken to Egypt, where his life would take an unexpected turn. There, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court. The biblical narrative highlights that from the moment Joseph entered Potiphar's house, the Lord was with Joseph, and everything he did prospered. Over time, Potiphar noticed Joseph's exceptional abilities, and seeing that his household thrived under Joseph's management, he entrusted him with the administration of all his possessions. Joseph became Potiphar's steward, responsible for all aspects of the house, except for Potiphar's wife. However, Joseph's prosperity attracted the unwanted attention of Potiphar's wife. Impressed by Joseph's good looks and skills, she repeatedly attempted to seduce him. Despite her persistence, Joseph remained steadfast in his integrity, refusing to betray his master's trust and sin against God, saying, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Her constant rejection only fueled her desire, and she continued to try to seduce him. One day, when all the servants were absent, Potiphar's wife seized the opportunity to grab Joseph and try to force him to lie with her. In a desperate act, Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in her hands. Humiliated and enraged by the rejection, Potiphar's wife decided to take revenge. She cried out for help, claiming that Joseph had tried to assault her and presented his cloak as proof of the false accusation. Upon returning, Potiphar was informed of the alleged crime. Despite the severity of the accusation, Potiphar did not condemn Joseph to death, a common punishment for a slave accused of violating his master's wife. This suggests that Potiphar knew Joseph's character and perhaps suspected the true nature of the events. Instead, Potiphar chose a less severe punishment and sent Joseph to the royal prison, where Pharaoh's prisoners were held. Despite the adverse circumstances, the biblical narrative makes it clear that the Lord was with Joseph, and he soon found favor in the eyes of the chief jailer. With his integrity and administrative skills, Joseph quickly gained the trust of the jailer, who entrusted him with the responsibility of caring for the other prisoners and overseeing the prison's operations. Just as in Potiphar's house, everything under Joseph's management prospered, even in the grim conditions of captivity. While in prison, Joseph encountered two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, who had been imprisoned. Both had disturbing dreams on the same night and were troubled by their meanings. Seeing their distress, Joseph offered to interpret the dreams, asserting that interpretation belongs to God. The cupbearer spoke first, sharing his dream, which involved a vine with 3 branches that produced grapes, from which he made wine for Pharaoh. Joseph interpreted that the 3 branches represented 3 days, and that at the end of this period, the cupbearer would be restored to his original position. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention his situation to Pharaoh so that he too might be freed from prison. Encouraged by the positive interpretation, the chief baker shared his dream, which involved 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating the bread from the top basket. However, Joseph had to deliver a grim interpretation. The 3 baskets represented 3 days, after which the baker would be hanged and the birds would eat his flesh. 3 days later, exactly as Joseph had interpreted, the cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed. However, despite the accuracy of the interpretations, the cupbearer, once restored to service, forgot about Joseph, who remained in prison for another 2 years, unaware that his release was near. Then one day, Pharaoh had 2 dreams that troubled him deeply, but no one in his court could interpret them. At this moment, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had correctly interpreted his dream in prison. Joseph was quickly brought from the prison and presented to Pharaoh. When asked about the dreams, Joseph humbly stated that the interpretation would come from God and explained that the dreams revealed that Egypt would experience 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph not only interpreted the dreams but also suggested a strategy to deal with the impending crisis, recommending that Pharaoh appoint a wise man to oversee the collection of food during the years of plenty, ensuring sufficient provisions for the years of scarcity. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom and discernment, Pharaoh appointed him governor of Egypt, giving him the authority to implement the plan he had proposed. Joseph's life changed dramatically. From an unjustly accused prisoner, he was elevated to the second most powerful position in the kingdom, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph was given the Egyptian name Zaphenath-Paneah and was married to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. This marriage further solidified Joseph's position in Egypt, integrating him into the country's social and religious elite. Over time, some have mistakenly interpreted that Potiphar, because he was a eunuch, changed his sex and adopted the name Potiphar. However, this interpretation has no basis in the scriptures and results from confusion between 2 distinct characters. The Bible does not mention that Potiphar, the Egyptian official who bought Joseph as a slave, changed his sex or name. It is essential to distinguish that Potiphar and Potiphar are, in fact, 2 completely different people in the biblical narrative. Potiphar is mentioned in Genesis 39 as the captain of Pharaoh's guard, who bought Joseph and made him his steward. He plays an important role in Joseph's early story in Egypt, but his story is not connected with that of Potiphar, except for the coincidence of names. Potiphar, on the other hand, is introduced in Genesis 41 verse 45 as the priest of On and the father of Asenath, Joseph's wife. The confusion between these 2 names can lead to erroneous interpretations, but it is crucial to understand that Potiphar and Potiphar occupy distinct roles in Joseph's story and are not the same person. Even the question of whether Potiphar was castrated is a controversial topic. There is no direct evidence in the Bible that clearly states this condition. In fact, the biblical narrative focuses more on his position of power and his relationship with Joseph than on details of his physical condition. The Hebrew term used to describe Potiphar in Genesis 39 verse 1 is saris, which is often translated as officer or eunuch. However, this term can have different meanings depending on the context and does not always imply castration. In the ancient Near East, including Egypt, saris could refer to a high-ranking official at court, regardless of whether he was a eunuch. In Potiphar's case, although he is called a saris, the biblical narrative does not give any explicit indication that he was castrated. To avoid confusion, many updated versions of the Bible present Potiphar as an officer of Pharaoh without directly mentioning whether he was a eunuch or not. Moreover, the fact that Potiphar was married and the dynamics involving the attempted seduction of Joseph suggest that he was not castrated, as in ancient Egyptian culture, eunuchs typically did not marry or hold positions of power involving traditional family responsibilities. Some scholars argue that the term saris might have been used to indicate his high status as a trusted official of Pharaoh without necessarily implying castration. Another important point is to understand that, in the historical context, castration, though common in various ancient cultures, was never used for sex change or as a way to alter gender identity. Castration had specific functions, such as ensuring loyalty and neutralizing threats within the political and social context, especially in royal courts, where eunuchs were often employed in positions of great trust. Projecting modern ideas about gender identity onto ancient practices distorts historical understanding and ignores the true function of these practices. In Potiphar's case, any suggestion that he underwent a sex change is entirely unfounded and reflects an anachronistic interpretation, with no basis in the scriptures or the cultural reality of the ancient Near East. The Bible does not provide detailed information about what happened to him after the incident with Joseph and his imprisonment. The narrative in Genesis focuses primarily on Joseph's life, from his arrival in Egypt as a slave to his rise as governor. Potiphar, though playing a significant role in purchasing Joseph and placing him in his household, disappears from the biblical narrative after the episode of the false accusation made by his wife. Now we want to hear from you. Were you familiar with these interpretations of Potiphar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you'd like, suggest other biblical characters you'd be interested in seeing a video about. We'll be sure to consider your suggestions, and with God's grace, we'll do our best to create the content you want. God bless you, and see you soon.